It's time for another show from Colin Jones, the Reasonable Adventurer. Time for you to take another step towards creating your own opportunities for satisfaction.
And it is a huge welcome to you all to episode 118 of the Reasonable Adventurer. And having started to pull the covers back a little bit and reveal the big name, Primed Adventuring, and starting to talk a little bit more in past episodes about notions of creating opportunities for satisfaction, I thought it would be appropriate today to introduce you to a wonderful, wonderful little book that really has happiness at its centre. It's something that obviously has to be sort of entwined in any conversation around satisfaction. How to create opportunities for satisfaction without having some form of definition or some sort of take on what happiness is for you in society and so on. So, let me introduce you to this absolute gem of a book. If you've ever felt a little suspicious of the happiness industrial complex, the endless hacks, habits, and hot takes promising bliss by Friday, well, today's book is a refreshing reset. We're going back to 1955 when the Scottish-born American sociologist Robert McIver published The Pusit of Happiness, a philosophy for modern living. It's short, it's lucid, and it's remarkably current in how it treats happiness as a tone of life rather than a constant mood spike. McIver was very famous for his long career at Columbia University and his later leadership at the New School for Social Research. He was a humanist sociologist who drew careful lines between the individual and social order. And his body of work stretches from political theory, community, juvenile justice, and this small little volume just sits at the sort of humane heart of all of his work. Here's how we'll travel. First, as always, we're going to set up the big idea. We'll walk through how McIver develops it, translate it into everyday applications, compare it to other thinkers, note what makes it different, and point you towards opportunities for further exploration. And then, of course, we'll finish by connecting it to our favourite lens, the 6 attributes of the Reasonable Adventurer. So, you leave with a living framework that you can start to reflect upon and hopefully apply within your life. So, let's dive in. Published in the mid-century ferment of mass media, conformity panics, and suburban boom, The Pusit of Happiness offered a calm counterpoint, a set of reflections on what helps people achieve not a permanent state, but moments of real happiness and an authentic tone to their lives. Contemporary reviewers summarise the terrain that McIver covers: the threats to integrity, so empty leisure, group pride, privacy erosion, the straitjacket of conformity, the universality of the golden rule, and the need to face truth, balance knowledge and wisdom, and place sex, love, death, and reproduction in the human perspective. But the big idea, McIver's thesis, in simple terms, happiness isn't a possession, it's a way of living with reality. It's not hedonism, it's not denial. It's the cultivated capacity to meet life truthfully, resisting false solutions and shallow conformity, and to build conditions in which moments of genuine happiness can naturally arise. Honest relationships, meaningful work and leisure, a sense of privacy and dignity, and an ethic that respects others as ends, not means. In short, MacGyver saw human life in balance with oneself and within society. MacGyver didn't promise a hack. He speaks in the key of humanism. The same year you hear throughout his academic career an insistence that the individual person with hopes and values can flourish with society rather than being flattened by it. One of the things I most love about going back to this book time and time again is just the comfort that I get from reminding myself that the book was written in 1955 and that my first engagement with his works was his first book, Community, from 1917. So I'm reading the reflections of an old man in 1955, and I'm always thinking to myself, wow, this is so relevant to the current life, the current age that we're all living in. That's what makes it such a beautiful book. So in terms of the development of the idea, it's not a step-by-step manual in any needs. The development unfolds in sort of mediations, building from chapter to chapter. But there's a clear flow. So he starts with what gets in the way. MacGyver inventories the modern obstacles. Remember, when I'm referring to the word here, modern, I'm talking about his modern world of 1955, but the parallels to today are just so uncanny. Of course, we have to change in and change out technologies. So in 1955, it was the encroaching technology of television that was superseding radio. And now, of course, we have the internet and so on and so on. So he talked about these inventories of modern obstacles. The regret that fixates on youth, the perils to privacy, leisure may be empty, group pride that narrows our sympathies, conformity that saps authenticity, and the dangerous habit of locating values in the nerves rather than the heart, i.e. confusing excitement with meaning. This is a critique of culture as much as of individuals. You can do everything right and still miss the point if you outsource your values to the crowd. Interesting reflection in this day and age. Secondly, the moral backbone, the universality of truth. He then centres an ethic you already know but may treat as optional, the golden rule. Not a scold, but a pragmatic anchor. Treating others as ends stabilises our own life's tone. And he tries to do this by calling, asking us to face truth, seeing ourselves and the world as they are, not as our anxieties or appetites wish them to be. Thirdly, this notion of wisdom and knowledge. MacGyver distinguishes information from insight. Knowledge alone can tempt us into cleverness without compassion. Wisdom asks what knowledge is for. In society that's proud of progress and productivity, he says this distinction matters if we want happiness to be more than the dopamine chase. He then moves on to the intimate circle between sex, love, family and death. And rather than treating these as separate silos, he threads them into a single question. What kind of life are we shaping with others? Sex without life? Life without dignity? Life without an awareness of death? Each distorts the tone of, that he's after. Our relationships and our responses to mortality must honour persons, not merely satisfy impulses. He then goes on to think about the social surrounds, freedom and limits. MacGyver knows the individual is never an island. He spent his career mapping the differences between the state and community, arguing for democracies that limit power and protect personality. That background hums in this book. Happiness grows where the social order makes room for privacy, conscience, and dissent. The goal, he then finally arrives at, is moments of happiness and an authentic tone. Instead of promising permanent bliss, he aims for this sort of authenticity that's sustained over time. The capacity for moments of joy that are consistent with your values, your truth, and your responsibility. It's less a destination than a practice way of being. So how do we take these observations of MacGyver and sort of think about their everyday application? Well, here's 6 concrete moves aligned with MacGyver's themes. We want to think about how we upgrade leisure to aliveness. Audit 1 hour of leisure that leaves you numb, whether it's the doom scrolling, default TV media, and swap it for an activity that engages mind or hand. A walk with a friend, a short story, a sketch, tending to a plant. MacGyver's point is that he doesn't mean to moralise, but to rescue leisure from emptiness, because empty leisure erodes the tone of life. And I think we all can relate to this, when we find ourselves just scrolling through people's feeds on social media. What is the purpose for that? Is that our leisure? Is that what leisure's become? Or can we find something that has a little bit more purpose to it? Secondly, rebuild the privacy perimeter. Again, this is just staggering when you think about this advice from 1955. Pick one boundary to reinforce this week. No devices in the bedroom after 10, or a dedicated hour for reading without notifications. The mid-century anxiety about privacy erosion applies doubly now. Dignity and reflection need a door that closes. Practice truth with grace. Choose one conversation where you'll favour honest clarity over easy smoothering, and deliver it with kindness. MacGyver's insistence on facing truth isn't a license to bludgeon. It's an invitation to align your inner and outer worlds, which is a precondition for real happiness. You can then think about this notion of the golden rule upgraded. Before a tough email, ask, if I were on the receiving end, what would respect feel like here? It's a small daily way to interact, engage with that's universal, the world we're living with. MacGyver champions and to build a kind of social fabric in which well-being can grow. The second last point he's making here is this notion of wisdom being bigger and better than cleverness. When you're tempted to tout a fact, pause. Oh, heaven forbid that we might pause. Pause and ask why. Why is that fact for? How does it help? Practicing these questions turns information into wisdom, exactly the pivot that MacGyver wants for a modern life. And then lastly, honour the whole arc. Make a 5-minute note about one uncomfortable reality you often avoid. Maybe it's thinking about aging, loss, hard relationships, and write one action that acknowledges it with dignity. Schedule a check-in call, update a will, apologise. Happiness, in MacGyver's sense, is robust to look mortality in the eye. There's a high degree of candour here, even if it's just with ourselves in the first instance, but forgiving ourselves, letting ourselves off the hook, being able to actually cope with the heaviness of reality and turn it into something lighter, it's got to be a positive thing for us all. So, in terms of how these ideas are related to others, well, MacGyver's perspective sits in a conversation with a few classics and modern frameworks. Bertrand Russell's The Conquest of Happiness from 1930, that diagnoses causes of unhappiness, envy, boredom, fear of opinion, and prescribes practical antidotes. But his sort of brisk and behavioural approach, while MacGyver is more civic-minded and ethical, I suspect, and both converge on resisting comparison and cultivating interests that enlarge the self. One of my favourites, which we'll certainly get to in coming weeks, Viktor Frankl's The Man's Search for Meaning, argues that lasting well-being is a byproduct of meaning, discoverable in work, love, and how we face suffering. MacGyver shares that anti-hedonic stance, happiness as a tone that emerges when we live truthfully and purposefully. And I suppose it's always interesting sometimes to sort of think about how it differs from other works that we're likely to bump into. And I think there are three distinctions that MacGyver's contributions make that are quite enduring. A sociologist's humanism is not self-help quick fix. So MacGyver thinks personally and structurally at once. Your habits matter, but so do the conditions. Privacy norms, group pressures, cultural scripts that shape life. Where many books start and end in the self, MacGyver keeps social order on the table. And I think this is this notion of making sure there's a balance between the inner and the outer world. That's sort of like it's not negotiable in terms of finding moments of happiness. Moving from this sort of moments and tone, not permanent bliss. So a contemporary viewer that I came across distilled it well. He noted that he aims at the achievement of moments of happiness and authentic tone, language that resists the fantasy, of permanent peak experiences and invites a mature and sustainable stance towards living. And then there's the issues of ethical universals without moralizing. You don't get that sense when you read the book. It's very pragmatic. MacGyver appeals to universal ideas, the golden rule, truthfulness, yet he handles them with a light hand. The goal isn't moral scorekeeping, it's building the preconditions under which happiness can arise without betraying our humanity. So, what other books are consistent to this that if you're wanting to sort of further explore? Well, you can easily find this book, and I should have mentioned this as we're going through the episodes. When we're dealing with any of these old books, you can always find them, abbooks.com. You'll always find them there. Many of them, obviously, they'll be reprinted and for sale on Amazon and so on. But the archive.org, you can read all of these books if you go to archive.org and just sign yourself in there. Free, you can read the books. It's a great way to find out if you actually really want a book. But you could certainly try, as we've mentioned before, Russell's Conquest of Happiness or Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And then, of course, you've got some quite contemporary works like Seligman's Perma, to see how contemporary science rearticulates this multi-element view of flourishing that rhymes with MacGyver's balance. So, our common endpoint. How does MacGyver's ideas connect to the 6 attributes of the reasonable adventurer? So I promised a practical lens to carry out the door. The 6 attributes of the reasonable adventurer: intellectuality, close friendships, independence, invalid judgments, tolerance of ambiguity, breadth of interest, and sense of humour. They come from an attached framework that champions self-development and social learning. So let's map MacGyver's insights here to each of those attributes so you can use them. Well, in terms of intellectuality, MacGyver's whole project is an invitation to think, not just feel, to weigh knowledge against wisdom, to face truth, and to write your own criteria for a good life, rather than inheriting them unexamined. That's textbook intellectuality, collecting, interpreting, and reflecting in order to judge. Secondly, in terms of close friendships, he treats sex and love within a human ethic. People as ends, not means. Practical, that means we don't instrumentalize others for a happiness fix. We attend to their particularity. Friendship, in this sense, is a training ground for the golden rule. Independence in value judgments. Well, MacGyver warns about the straitjacket of conformity and group pride. He wants you to own your standards, not to rent them from the loudest tribe. That's exactly the attitude call. Confidence born of listening, testing, and choosing. In terms of tolerance of ambiguity, MacGyver's happiness makes room for death, loss, and imperfect days. He's not selling certainty. He's recommending an equanimity that can meet reality. Interruptions are included without panic. This is the attribute in action. Pause judgment, gather information, and then decide. In terms of breadth of interest, he's suspicious of empty leisure, which nudges us to the reenactment of the ordinary. To read, repair, garden, notice. Breadth becomes depth when we reconnect ideas to our own lives. The attribute's mantra is to bring theory home, exactly as MacGyver suggests, making an uncommon interest in the commonplace. And finally, sense of humour. Well, MacGyver's prose here is very measured, but the stance invites lightness. Resist the melodrama of keeping up. Don't confuse nervous thrills with genuine value. Humour loosens the grip of status anxiety and lets us act from dignity rather than panic. In short, MacGyver gives us a map for the reasonable adventurer. Keep your mind awake, your friendships humane, your standards your own, your nerves steady in ambiguity, your interest alive, and your humour kind. That's how a life acquires the authentic tone he hoped for. The pursuit of happiness won't tell you to manifest a yacht or a cold plunge your way to some sort of bliss. It will ask you to build a life that can host joy through truth, dignity, friendship, meaningful leisure, and a stubborn refusal to let the crowd set your values. It's a 1955 voice that sounds, to me, like a clear bell in 2025. If this episode resonated, share it with somebody who's tired of quick fixes and ready for a reasonable adventurer. What part will you test first? The privacy perimeter, the golden rule email, the reclaimed hour of leisure? Until we meet again, search for adventure everywhere.